Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 283 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on December 21st, 2024. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbender.online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, we have a pretty important show, I suppose, this time out. It's going to be basically the last one of the year. We're going to be finishing off, as part of our rewatches, Legend of Korra Book 2 Spirits with K214 Light in the Dark. But we've got a pretty packed news section as well, because we have leaks about the first Avatar Studios animated series to talk about, the Earth Avatar series. So that will take up some time. And that's mostly what we're going to do. We're going to get the other news out of the way, then we'll jump into the Earth Avatar news. So we're going to start with some smaller things here. But first of all, something that's going on right now, and I think all the way until the 30th of December, is Avatar and Overwatch collaboration. So this is specifically Overwatch 2, and they are adding in a bunch of skins for the characters and like extra items and stuff like that. I believe the Mei skin as Katara is available for free if you do challenges. The other ones, I believe, are paid for. So the details on this is that it's this is the Overwatch characters basically wearing cosplay of the Avatar characters, rather than them specifically trying to accurately alter the character to be the actual character from Avatar. So Mei as Katara, Zenyatta as Aang, Orisa as Appa, Venture as Toph, Genji as Zuko, and Kiriko as Suki. So interesting combination here. They hit the usual thing of one character of each element. They always include Aang as the Avatar. They often like to include Appa as well. And they've actually given us Suki, interestingly, this time, but there's no Sokka. But I think I understand why they did that. Sokka's maybe not the... It maybe is a tricky one to give into a specific Overwatch character, maybe. But it seems pretty interesting for people who like Overwatch. This looks like a pretty good collab, sort of somewhat on par with the Fortnite collaboration. The only reason I'm not really getting involved in this is just because I've not played Overwatch since like the first few weeks of the first game, and I don't really want to get back into it. And I believe some of the skins are kind of expensive in this game as well. But what are your thoughts on this? Another big Avatar video game collaboration here with Overwatch?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's cool that we're, still getting these, and it shows the power of the brand. And I think, they look cool. The promo video that they had for it is very cool. Like, I think the animation for that is really nice. It's always cool to see how they choose to promote their sort of crossovers here. So no, it definitely looks cool. And seeing the characters in game, they do look pretty cool for the most part. So I like how they adapted their powers and everything like that, and how they have them, essentially try to mimic those characters. So no, I think it's cool. If you're into Overwatch, it definitely seems like something that people would be interested in doing and stuff like that. So no, I think it's cool.
Yeah. Am I correct in that like this also includes sort of like they've adjusted like attack animations to be more Avatar-y as well, I think.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, because they definitely had the Toph one, like Earth coming out of the ground, and I don't think the actual core character is necessarily kind of moving Earth type thing, so they're definitely doing stuff like that. So yeah, it seems like they put the effort in here. No Korra, but it's unfortunately maybe to be expected. Minor piece of news to throw in there as well is probably just that 2 days ago, December 19th, was the 10-year anniversary of the end of Korra. No news came out in relation to that. There were some posts on the official accounts about it, but it was very much just, oh hey, this is a thing, rather than big deal, Avatar Studios, we're going to use this to our advantage. Kind of just came and went, unfortunately, though. The usual kind of appreciation for Korra, which we're going to be talking about later on. So that out of the way, we can move on to a big update, actually, probably the biggest update to the Avatar Studios official website. A whole new section added. This is the timeline section that features kind of two ways you can order it. One is just the era timeline, which is basically the in-universe timeline, and the other one is the release timeline, which of course is basically when the individual pieces of content released in kind of real world chronological order. It's kind of cool because it does cover it goes it basically by product effectively. That's how they kind of break it down. It's product, specific episodes. They don't get super granular on a specific character moment at a specific point in time. It's more where episodes are placed, comics are placed, but it's pretty nice. It's detailed in some parts, it's not super detailed in others. The main things to note here is basically they do one, of course, the furthest back in time thing, and then they go into this section called Hidden History, where it says more than 90 avatars lived between the eras of Wan and Yang Chen. Thousands of stories from this time are yet to be told. So they skip over a lot of the avatars we don't know much about, or we only have minimal information on, but the confirmation that effectively it's more than 90 avatars plus the 7 named avatars that they actually name on the timeline, giving us the idea that basically there's a bit of wiggle room, 97 plus avatars overall, completely moving away from, and I think thankfully the Roku quote about the 1,000 lifetimes type thing. No, we are talking about 100 avatars, give or take. So that's cool. What are your thoughts on that? I suppose finally getting more concrete information that, yeah, we're only talking about 100 avatars.
Yeah, no, I think that works a lot better, like you're saying there. Like, thousands and thousands. That seems a lot, and it didn't really work as well. I mean, granted, it's a cycle, and the whole thing could be rebooted a bunch of times, and we wouldn't even have known it or anything like that. The way that they're doing it and stuff. But no, I think this works better for a more concrete, more sort of sustainable, approach to doing stories in the future. So no, I think it works.
Mm-hmm. We go through the era of Yang Chen. The other most interesting thing here, the only real new date on this, is that they do give a specific timeline date for when the Yang Chen novels take place. And I jumped on this immediately because I was like, wait, can we finally figure out how old Yang Chen is when she dies? And you actually can work it out. I did it in a video and on Twitter and stuff like that. But the idea is that because we know the age and kind of timeline stuff about all the previous avatars, you can work backwards to this number, and it gives the number that I think Yang Chen lives to be 155. Now, there is some dispute about this just because in a weird kind of turn of events, this age matches the really well-known kind of fanon thing on the wiki that's like a fan fiction that also puts Yang Chen at 155. So because the timeline doesn't really have a lot of other information, it's kind of, have they made a mistake here to line it up with that, or are they actually committing to her being 155? It's hard to say just because there's no context given for why some of these numbers are given necessarily, but you can work it out is sort of the idea there. What are your thoughts on that? The idea that this information, if we lock it in as canon, gives Yang Chen also a pretty large age, 155.
Yeah, I mean, age-wise in the Avatarverse, the way that we've, come to understand it, can be variable, and, it's a fantasy world. So, the fact that our characters are living older, and especially the avatars, that doesn't really bug me too much. It is funny that it does sort of line up with what was, sort of already pseudo-established. But, there's no knowing if they knew that ahead of time or not, or if it's just a coincidence the way that these things are developed and stuff like that. But, it's good that at least we have something more-ish to go by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have a section for Kurok highlighting his section from Shadow of Kyoshi, as well as the fact that I like that they have big sections here for Escape from the Spirit World. They're locking that in as canon, even in 2024. I like that. Kyoshi, of course, gets covered here, including stuff like her Avatar Day appearance and Escape from the Spirit World. Kyoshi, at Roku's era, is basically Avatar and the Fire Lord, Reckoning of Roku, and his Escape from the Spirit World. And then it gets a lot more detailed, of course, with Avatar, where they just highlight a year for season 1, 2, and 3. Plus a lot of this is where the comics start to come in. So Qatar and the Pirate Silver is of course placed between season 2 and 3. We get Escape from the Spirit World, the present day part of the story, cutting to season 3. Suki alone, the mainline comics come in at this point, and we find, I suppose they sort of clarify how long has actually occurred in the comics, which lines up with my view on it, which would be that I think the way it works out, Aang would not quite be 16 yet where we are in the comics, but again, there's no explanation given here about there's this much time between them. It's all in the same year, including like Ashes of the Academy, with probably the only significant thing being that Azula in the Spirit Temple actually takes place before North and South, which is a slightly interesting detail, that it's more of a direct follow-up to Smoke and Shadow, which is interesting. Korra includes Republic City Hustle, the seasons, and of course the comics as well, including the newer ones kind of at the end of the timeline. There are some issues, probably the biggest one being that we go from the year 10,000, because they use basically harmonic convergence as the 0 point, the initial one that formed the Avatar. And so season 2, which we're going to talk about later on, is exactly 10,000. But then as they cut to season 3, we're suddenly in 10,002, even though literally the first episode of season 3 has dialogue saying that it's like, I think exactly 2 or 3 weeks later. So there's some mistakes in here where it's hard to understand what logic they're using for some of this stuff, and I think it puts some of the Korra dates off by like a year, because realistically it probably should be like 10,001, if even that. But a lot of it is just kind of weirdness about this is a new format than we're kind of used to, and they're clearly doing a lot of rounding up and downs with these numbers. But what are your thoughts overall on the kind of the detail in this timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I like that there's at least an attempt at some sort of structure. I mean, this is something that we've been, talking about or hoping that they would have had for like a long time now, and many people have made up their own sort of timelines with it. So I think it's good that we're having this official one. I do, I can understand how things can seem like a little bit off, and I do think that they probably are just sort of rounding just to sort of keep it, not so locked down, because some of it does seem a little bit sort of wonky the way they're doing it. But I don't know, maybe they're picking different points in the season to consider their sort of official starting points. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know sort of their logic behind some of that, but that doesn't seem like something that we would get. But it's cool to see how it's just overall all broken down, and something that you can actually share to people and be like, yo, look at this. This is what happened if you want to know.
Yeah, and especially because it just has a list of all the comics basically here, and a link to get a copy. I think they all link to Amazon. Yeah, they all link to Amazon. So it's a really easy way to just highlight to people that this is everything, and this is actually the order. And you can choose to do release or timeline order, which is pretty nice. They don't list every single short story, of course, because that is where it starts to get kind of complicated, and it is more of a case with the short stories of just read them whenever, slot them in yourself is more the idea there. I would definitely say I preferred this numbering system to the fan-based one with the AGBG, which as a kind of lore-focused kind of content creator, I always hate using that system, because I find it just in my head to be very confusing that we're choosing the 0 point to be the arrival of the comet like 100 years in the past. So everything with Aang, which is the main kind of part of the continuity, is offset by 100 kind of a little bit randomly. Whereas I prefer this one because there's a clear 0 point of it's the era of the Avatar. 0 is 1 now is the Avatar. 10,000 is the Avatar was broken but kind of restored again. And then I think within that you can then break it down into sort of this year within a specific Avatar's life, which is I think the more effective way to do it for me. Because even this one has its problems of like saying that like season 1 of Avatar is 9,929 after harmonic convergence 1 is slightly confusing, but I think it's slightly more effective than talking about everything in relation to the comet necessarily, one coming of the comet. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, the fan system of the basically Air Nomad genocide being the 0 point versus this?
I mean, I think when we didn't have the whole sort of picture of sort of harmonic and convergence and stuff like that, I think it kind of makes sense that we would use some sort of historical landmark as the sort of point of reference. That's sort of how we do it sort of now in real world. But the idea that we have this sort of larger encompassing sort of event that, literally affects the whole world and, resets it essentially for the next, period of years. I think that, knowing that now, that feels like a better zero point for to sort of start things. It's also less dependent on any sort of nation doing any sort of specific sort of event, so it feels more sort of encompassing, more global in that sort of regard. At least, in my mind, that's sort of how it works. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, various sort of nations have their own sort of ways of doing things, as we have in our own real world here in terms of different calendars and different systems. But in terms of a overarching thing, I think this works well enough for me. And unless you're really sort of into sort of the fandom, the whole sort of comet system base of doing things is sort of you don't really pay attention to it. Like, I've
Yeah.
talked to other people who are pay attention to Avatar, and they're fans of it, but they're not into it as much as some of us who follow it online, and they're just like, what is this sort of system? And it just relates to sort of how we sort of currently doing things. So no, it doesn't. It works for me. I think it's a nice sort of stepping point for getting it the sort of all work mostly together. No system's ever going to be perfect, and I'm sure plenty of people have other better systems to do it. But it's good. It's straightforward. It gives a hard number, even if the numbers may be nebulous a bit.
hmm But yeah, it also should be noted that, yeah, like the AGBG system is completely fan done. Officially, they actively avoid referencing it like ever. A notable example is when the older Pro Bending Arena Kickstarter was happening. They showed some initial art of like a poster for Pro Bending that included like a year using AG, and they immediately had to kind of correct that because they don't like, they don't seem to want them using this as the format, because obviously canonically it makes very little sense that that's the in-world dating that they'd use in relation to this disaster of what happened with the air nomads. But just in general, even from a timeline perspective on the website, where it's kind of a little bit removed from canon full on, they still don't want to use it. So that will be interesting to see how things go forward. But our last piece of news before we get into the Earth Avatar stuff is we are going to have an Avatar story for Free Comic Book Day 2025, which is coming up on May 3rd, 2025. So it's Avatar, and also the cover is Star Wars Young Jedi Adventures. So the Avatar section has the description here. Samurai Appa and Ronin Momo roam the four nations, righting wrongs wherever they go. In this special Avatar Free Comic Book Day tale, the Sky Bison and Winged Lemur find themselves at a beleaguered Fire Nation noodle house, where some of the clientele are tougher customers than the owner would like. Can the duo bring some order to chaos and maybe even earn themselves lunch in the process? Or will they be out on their tails? I think most of the reaction to this has been, huh? Like really? This is what we're doing as our kind of return to a Free Comic Book Day book for the first time in a while? And especially with this being like the year we expect Avatar Studios to kind of push forward a little bit more, this seems a little random, because speaking of canon, where on earth does this get placed in canon? Because Samurai Appa and Ronin Momo are like Aang daydream constructs, basically, and they're now leaning into that. So I'm wondering, are they just committing to that just to tell stories with the characters, or will there be some sort of a story-based explanation for like someone's daydreaming this happening, or something like that? I think it could be fun to just see a lot of art, including these characters, and dialogue from Appa and Momo again. But I think I often look for these to be something a little bit more interesting of note, using the short story format like previous ones have been, but it should be fun. What are your thoughts on this as the Free Comic Book Day book?
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's just sort of one of those where they just want to make a story and they're just sort of having it in there. Like, I mean, I'm sure they'll, if they want to, they can figure out a way to justify it in someone's sort of like imagination or something like that. But yeah, it doesn't really, from the other ones that have, even if they're super short stories, they did sort of add something to characters that we didn't necessarily know about. This one definitely feels sort of out there, especially since, like you said, these characters are ones that they're cool and they're fun. And I think, everyone sort of like remembers that episode sort of fondly. Um, but in sort of the grand scheme of the Avatar world, that doesn't really have like, a really important place. It's just a cool thing that they sort of just did on a whim or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to match the other side of the, free comic book day comic that it's going with. So they're just sort of trying to keep it a sort of super lighthearted sort of story here. But yeah, it definitely feels like it's sort of not really in place in order to sort of move things forward in the grander scheme of things with, other projects that we know are coming out. So yeah.
Yeah, at the very least, it adds to the list of books that will need to be collected in, I guess, a future kind of comic collection that we probably need, because like there's a few of the other ones that like are a bit out on their own at the moment and need a collection, even on the chorus side of things. So that's why we're expecting some decent stuff from Dark Horse now. But yeah, we'll finally get into the big news here, the Earth Avatar series kind of rumors and leaks. So, it's to a certain degree, this can seem like it came out of nowhere, but in the background, like I had seen one piece of this a few months ago, but it was very much a case of like, you can't really show this off, talk about this when like there's not much kind of to it. So it basically, the initial thing that came out, Night Edge Media posted effectively the text description from that initial kind of leak, and then that led to just other leaks kind of following it overall, and they all interlink in a variety of different ways, in that a lot of the stuff about sort of animatics and a lot of how we know the kind of premise of the series comes from the fact that people got basically test screening kind of copies of, I think it's the first 2 or 3 episodes, to watch in animatics, that I think included some basic documentation that has more kind of colorized kind of images of the characters, which is also what some of the visual leaks are for concept art purposes. And that's how we know quite a lot of the information. And that's like the first and kind of last leak are basically that. And then a lot of the other stuff is just some documentation happened to leak out. Some of it is casting information, and then some of it is just some storyboards. And then more recently, because one of the things that was revealed in the leaks was the code name for the series, Aurora, that allows you to then actually just look up public information about people who are working on a project called Aurora. And that led us to find basically the casting information, but now public instead of leaked, because we know what the code name is. And so there's been a few things here. At this point, there's no way it's not real. But I suppose, what are your thoughts overall on just that subject? Because a lot of the fandom has put their head in the ground and just be like, nope, this is not real. I don't trust it because it's leaks, even though not all of it is full-on leaks. Where do you stand on just, is it real or not?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point to make because, as far as we're understanding of it, nothing has come from, Avatar Studios directly or Paramount or Nickelodeon or any sort of, typical place we would consider, official in terms of, getting the information out there. Not even sort of like, an IGN or a comic book resource or something along those lines, right? So I definitely can understand sort of the hesitance and sort of, believing this stuff is, sort of as true as it, potentially seems to be. But I mean, for the stuff that is sort of publicly listed, it's kind of hard to sort of refute that sort of stuff. We've been talking about those type of things from even before, when Avatar Studio didn't really seem like it had employees and stuff like that, and we were see sort of the hiring practices on the Paramount site and stuff like that. So, some of that stuff, you have to take it for sort of what it is in terms of like seeing it up there, assuming they're, hiring people and actors and people to do those sort of jobs and sort of the tech behind how they're sort of doing some of this stuff. So a lot of that stuff for me personally falls into that sort of category. No, some of the other stuff I definitely can understand why it doesn't really seem to sort of maybe align with what you would think it would be, especially since, again, it's not from any of the sort of typical sources. And when you get it from these sort of other sites that are just sort of dumping it out there, no, it definitely can feel like it's just sort of, random leaks and stuff like that. But I mean, I think, if you wanted to sort of like, just sort of wait behind and see what actually comes out, I think that's definitely a valid way to go about it, because it is a lot out there. It's not all sort of like organized. Some people like you have done a good job of like trying to get it together and stuff like that. But until we hear people really sort of talking about it, or we see like a trailer, or even sort of like a teaser trailer, or even sort of like an official sort of poster or something like that, it definitely can feel sort of hard to sort of believe some of the stuff there. And then depending on your sort of take on what they're proposed to be doing, that also can, really not sort of jive with what you sort of think for the future of it. But, there's always hit or miss with that sort of stuff regardless.
Like, some of this stuff is definitely real. It's way too elaborate, like industry quality, like pre-production material to not be real. And enough of it kind of interlinks together that like it is all related and in line with each other, in the sense that, yeah, the project code name is Aurora. You can find people on like LinkedIn who work at Nickelodeon who have been working on Aurora for years, including the dates that some of these documents are about. Aurora is listed in the kind of casting audition information and uses the sort of fake names for the characters, Priya and Nikki. But then we have the storyboard, which also says Aurora, but it uses the actual names, Pavi and Nisha. So you can sort of see like how you can connect it through and realize that like, okay, so information that doesn't mention Aurora but mentions Pavi and Nikki is actually real as well, because you can connect it through. There is some of the stuff that is more of it comes from like someone who works at Paramount source who just said stuff to people, and that is some of the vaguer information because it's their interpretation of what they saw rather than it being a document that says this specific thing. So as we go through this, I'll try to clarify what's like just kind of locked in clearly from visuals versus what's more kind of up in the air overall. So the core kind of, I suppose, premise of the series, we should start off with the idea that, again, it's Project Aurora. This is, as far as we're aware, the Earth avatar after Korra. The working title for the series is Seven Havens, because one of the main kind of dynamics going on here is that it seems like we're going to sort of switch in some way. There's a lot of vagueness about how exactly this happens, from having 4 nations to having 7 safe haven cities across the world. And this is going to be part of the big setup of the series, is why is the world like this, basically. I'll read out the logline from the publicly available casting information. So this is not part of a leak. It's Project Aurora. The logline for it is: in this epic animated adventure series, 2 young sisters are gifted with fantastical abilities. To save the planet from chaotic energy storms, they must unravel the mystery of where they came from. So obviously there's no Avatar stuff in here because they hide it as part of casting information. But then when you add in the information from like the sources about basically what the premise for the series is, it's effectively this. So where do I have that information? It's a bit further down. The main information is that we start off with something happens in Korra's era. We don't have any details on when exactly in the rest of Korra's life this happens, but something happens. Korra then has to react to this, and she does something where she somehow alters, destroys, remakes the world in some way, and stuff happens, and suddenly we cut to, in the new era, people live in 7 haven cities. The world is effectively a wasteland outside of these cities, consumed basically by energy storms, sandstorms, lightning storms, it's dangerous to go outside these cities. And this effectively means the four nations aren't really a thing anymore because everyone lives in 7 cities. It's a similar type situation to like the Line Turtles at the start of Beginnings, of course, but altered in that like we don't know what the specific setup is. Where the new avatar or avatars come into play is that basically there is confusion about this in terms of how locked in a lot of this information is, but they are twins. That basically is confirmed. Pavi and Nisha, twin girls. They are they're apparently both the avatar, or at least both have the powers of the avatar. It gets exceptionally vague, I think, with a lot of the details around this. About this is like the least clearly sourced part of this, apparently, but people who have seen the actual like animatic stuff are saying that at the very least both girls display, I think, multiple elements and both use the avatar state in some form or another. We'll get into talking about some of these details in just a second. The setup from there is that at some point when they're much younger, they're 9 for the kind of present day part of the story, something happens when they're younger which results in Pavi losing her kind of one of her legs, and so she has a prosthetic as we're into the kind of present day story. Also added on to this is that something again happens that results in the White Lotus taking the other sister, so Nisha, but not taking Pavi or not being aware of what's happened to Pavi. And so Nisha is raised by the White Lotus as the next avatar, apparently, and Pavi is forgotten in one of these haven cities until the first episode basically happens that seems to bring the sisters back together, and they have to like work and train together to, based on that description, find out the truth about basically, save the planet, like what's going on with these storms, revert the world back to the way it was, so we can live outside of these cities. And then also it says there the mystery of where they came from. So the confusion about the fact that like they're twins, they're potentially both the avatar, is a direct mystery as part of the series, which a lot of people seem to take that point as being they're never going to explain why there are 2 avatars, when very clearly that's probably one of the direct like premises of the series overall. So that was a rough way of explaining most of the kind of core information. There's information we have on the characters, which we'll get into in a second, but as the premise for this series, what are your thoughts on that? Really changing up the world here, something crazy happening in Korra's time. We potentially have twin avatars and a world that is a kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland. What are your thoughts on this as the next Avatar series?
Yeah, it's definitely intriguing the way that they're going about it, and it sort of feels sort of reflective, like even the previous one of like sort of how we're currently thinking about things in the world and stuff like that. So I think it's it's definitely an interesting direction to go with it, and it sort of reflects how we sort of feel, or the certain zeitgeist of the world and stuff like that. So I think it's intriguing. I'm curious to see how it really sort of plays out overall, considering this, it is a pretty big sort of change from what we have sort of seen before. But maybe the idea of it sort of being sort of a pseudo reset of things sort of keeps it in line and sort of keeps it fresh and new, and without sort of having us do, maybe go in certain directions that they're, sort of not comfortable with sort of working with in terms of like how things could progress going forward. It's an interesting way to sort of work around maybe some of those things. But no, I think it's interesting. It definitely feels like they're, sort of going with some things that we have sort of seen before. So, like anything, it's always sort of building upon what we sort of know in stories and tropes like that. So I don't know. It definitely feels like it has some potential to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that there's some big kind of crazy stuff going on here, that it is a big change in the world, because I think the concern about a maybe more standard sequel to Korra was just that it would be the same world just with slightly bigger technology, and the world is more like Republic City everywhere. Whereas this seems to try and go maybe in that direction, maybe that maybe is the rest of Korra's era until something happens, and we get this sort of reset situation. But again, because the plot seems to be to try and revert things, I guess, as much as possible back to the way it was, the whole shocking plot point of apparently the Four Nations are basically no more, like, I don't think they're going to be fully gone in the way we think they are. Just with the time scale of things, the Four Nations are still going to have a giant impact on the world. But of course, this is where we get into some of the vagueness of things. Of all we know is that literally something happens in Korra's time, and Korra does something. And these are the results. Was the world already destroyed and Korra just did something to sort of facilitate the safe cities? Or, you know, did something crazy happen with Korra, and Korra is in some mysterious way responsible for what has happened? That's obviously part of the mystery, and the whole idea of where they came from is, well, mysteries revealed at the end of Korra's era will tell us a lot. A lot of this I do view as, like, say you look at Korra Book 1, if you told someone years before it came out that, like, there'd be bloodbenders who can bloodbend in the middle of the day and stuff like that, would people believe you? Probably not. If you told people ahead of Book 2 that there would be a dark avatar, they wouldn't have believed you. So some of this stuff just feels like kind of a little bit of like knee-jerk reactions to concepts that are absolutely possible to happen in this universe, because the lore, as much as there is some rules, is not crazy locked down in a way where nothing new can ever happen. This all seems very possible and plausible, basically, because basically, like we're going to talk about with the episode later on, Light in the Dark, this almost seems like a direct kind of result of that to a certain degree. It has to be something related to keeping the portals open, the fact that there's a third portal now. Spirits are probably involved in some way, because it seems like there's like a spirit attack that's like the main inciting incident, but I don't think that necessarily confirms spirits are the direct problem with everything. So yeah, there's a lot of mysteries kind of at play here, for sure. From the casting information, this is more recent stuff that we got like a day or two ago. It seems like the project format is 26 episodes, each episode being 22 minutes. Now, I don't think that is absolutely locking in place that the series is only 26 episodes, or because obviously it doesn't say anything about format. But the assumption with that is probably that is 2 13-episode seasons based on the Korra format. But again, with Avatar Studios, we don't know how exactly their formatting for series is going to work. So at the very least, I view that as just the series is going to be at least 26 episodes with maybe the potential for more, depending on what plans actually are. Do you have any thoughts on that? The kind of episode count format, they're not doing anything different with the minutes per episode, and the format seems relatively standard overall.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, at least as far as that being sort of the initial or maybe even the full thing, I think, that could work fine. I mean, the way that, projects are working now and they're doing shows and episodes and seasons and everything like that is, it's changed a lot from, sort of what some of us older people have sort of grown up with and sort of the format that we're sort of used to having. So, if it is, double 13 or, some sort of combination of that, it could potentially work just as fine as, anything else, assuming they do the story in the right sort of way. But this doesn't really say sort of like the sort of, grand scope of the whole project. This is, pretty specific for this sort of casting, and, contracts and things sort of change over time, as we see, even with sort of, Korra in the beginning and how it wasn't sort of confirmed for anything going forward. So it'd be interesting to see sort of what those original sort of listings were for and how they sort of changed over time. Maybe that would give us a better grasp of how this could potentially change in the future. But I think, at least for the start of things, this seems pretty cool. I like the length and everything like that. So that at least is, where I'm coming from.
Yeah, because again, this post is from May 8th, 2023. This is when they were doing the casting for the main characters. Listed here as Priya and Nikki, but it's obviously Pavi and Nisha. So, and then there's also the idea that because they're twins, they're open to the same actor playing both characters, which is an interesting idea to see if they like went with that in the end, or they do have different voice actors. So that's definitely a kind of fun detail there with that. Um, let's get into talking about sort of characters here, because adding all the leaks together, we actually have what seems like relatively finalized. I suppose it's like the stuff you'd see in like the art books, basically for kind of like Pavi, Nisha, Jay, and some of the other characters as well. The way this happened is that as part of like the initial group of documents that leaked, there was a clear image that featured Pavi and Jay. But then, as part of the later leaks, there was a similar image, but it featured more characters. So it's Pavi, Nisha, Jay, Captain Karthik, as well as the girls' cat, monkey, animal companions, Jeet and Ruhi, who give very heavy Ravavatu vibes with their color schemes, I have to say. But I suppose let's briefly talk about this. What are your thoughts on some of these character designs here? So we basically have designs for like 6 characters here, 2 of which are animals. 2 of them are our kind of avatar twins. 2 of them, I guess, I think they're going to be revealed to be White Lotus guards, but I think the stuff that they're wearing is more like guard or soldier attire from Elora, one of the Haven cities. But what are your thoughts on seeing some of the more kind of finalized designs for characters?
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. I mean, I think, it fits with what sort of we sort of think of sort of the evolution of sort of Avatar sort of characters and their sort of design and, sort of what we've seen from Mike and Brian before. So I think, in terms of that design sort of aesthetic, it fits the mode, it fits sort of what we, understand for the characters, sort of, cultural sort of backgrounds and stuff like that. So I think in terms of that and, just sort of the general idea of, the Avatar world from what we knew before, at least, they fit that sort of mold and they're, cool, interesting designs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we basically have the idea Pavi seems to wear kind of mostly kind of pink-ish. Nisha is mostly wearing kind of darky, kind of green blue. I've seen some people complaining that Jay and Captain Karthik look a little plain, but they're clearly wearing like a uniform. So like I wouldn't like put too much thought into that, because the piece of, I would say, proper concept art shows the character, I suppose, that's clearly meant to be Jay in more of White Lotus attire, which we might see later on in the series, because I'm guessing this is more representative of the early series stuff. Because one interesting detail you note with the Pavi in each images is that her prosthetic leg is different in both. In the one with the 6 characters, it's like literally a peg leg, but in the one with 2 characters, it's been replaced with more of what you'd say is like a kind of modern kind of metal kind of prosthetic leg, which is a kind of interesting one. So maybe that's from a little later on. Maybe she starts out with the kind of peg leg, but maybe the White Lotus give her the kind of fancier one. There's some kind of cool stuff that we could see even just from that. As the kind of animal companions, I think they've kind of got it like 3 for 3 so far with our kind of main kind of animated series animal companions like Appa, Naga, and then these cats, even if it's just one or the other, are, I think, really cool animals, and I think people are going to love these, and especially if they have merchandise and they have cool plushes of these out, that's going to do, I think, very well for the franchise. So new animal, I don't think we've ever seen exactly this kind of animal before, but clearly cat, monkey. But also, interestingly, if you look at all the different stages of production, you can see that this animal has evolved heavily. The concept art, it's more monkey with a little bit of cat. The finalized one to me reads more as cat with a bit of monkey, which I think is probably the right way to go with it. But I think they look really cool. So what are your thoughts on our kind of cat monkey animal companion?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, like you're saying, that's going to be one that everyone is going to be talking about for sure, just because of, how they designed them and stuff like that. So no, I think that's probably going to work out pretty well. And of course, both of them, both of our twin characters has one. So that's, interesting in itself, just sort of how that sort of works.
Yeah, and then like I said, Ravavatu is very present here. Like they have the kind of diamond symbols on their foreheads, which is kind of similar to Ravavatu. It's not like exact, just because both of them have a lot of grey as well in them as well. They're not just Rava and Vatu, but it's there, and I kind of wonder with some of the mysteries going on, is that just a coincidence to kind of lead you down the Rava Vatu path, or what, in terms of the mystery of the girls and their powers, I suppose. But yeah, getting into the characters, Pavi, we have a full description of her from the kind of casting information, which is out now kind of publicly. So we get, 9 years old. She's described as quirky, cautious, empathetic, grounded. The twins are going to be mirrors of each other. She's independent and kind, a reluctant hero who avoids fighting, but believes in helping people and is creative. She's also a musician, and became an amputee after an incident in her early childhood, whereas Nikki is more focused on her powers and the attention that gives her, and she doesn't want to be forgotten and not accepted by others. She's awkward, but puts on this face of confidence to hide the fact that she feels actually like a fish out of water. And they both do seem to have sort of these kind of creative, innovative sides to them, but yes, opposites. And they're going for, in terms of avatar, South Asian here. So they're saying remind yourself of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and that definitely comes across in the designs that they have, which I think the reception to designs has mostly been pretty good. I think most of the maybe negative reception has mostly been from how does this impact Korra, just because there's a lot of vagueness about what exactly happened there, and maybe questions from a lore perspective about how they're going to execute on twin avatars. But I think the character designs people in general like, though I think there's a little bit of a concern about, like, our main characters are going to be 9, even younger than Aang. That's a little bit interesting, but we don't really know the full scope. But what are your thoughts on the kind of ideas for the two lead characters, the twin?
No, I like the sort of, at least, surface level description of our characters. I'm sure, it might be a little bit more sort of involved when we really get into them and sort of the story and stuff like that. But I think, at a high level, this feels like, the general idea that we would sort of see for our characters, and then, eventually they develop over time, and especially with them being so young, which, I can understand why that might seem a little bit sort of hesitance in terms of, how they're going to tell the story and stuff like that. But it gives them time to grow and to adapt and to change and stuff like that. So, that's sort of the good and the bad of having them being so sort of young when they're sort of starting out here. But I don't know. I think, overall, I think it's a good sort of platform to sort of start from. I don't know. I'm curious to see how it really sort of develops them over time, and how the series progresses, if it is just sort of them at this sort of age throughout the whole sort of thing that we have, or if there's any sort of time skips or time jumps or anything like that. So there's a lot they can do with it.
Yeah, the setup seems like it kind of has a bit of a sense for, like, are we just going to hit all these, like, 7 cities, or venture into the wastelands, and it's going to just all happen within a year or whatever, or is this going to be a long-term thing where we take years to do it? Because it does seem like they're both in training, so there's room to do stuff with. And even though, like, they're saying you're initially auditioning for a 9-year-old, they're going to leave themselves the opening for that to maybe be like 9 to 16 to a certain degree, hopefully, or something like that. But yeah, the other thing we have here is that this is more on the leaked information, but of course the official stuff mentions that, like, hey, attached are, like, the sides basically to do the audition, but we actually did get those as part of the leak. Now obviously they're from, what's it say here, it says April, I think, 2023, but there are scenes basically with these characters. Now of course it's just a draft, it's early, and it's also altered, so a lot of the avatar content is taken out. It is Nikki and Priya, but there's this drama scene of them kind of arguing with each other while earthbending at each other, which obviously highlights that the twins are reunited at this point, but they refer to some event that happened in the past, Priya lying about something, and it definitely links into the character descriptions that we do have, and the idea that they're both pained, there's anger about what happened in the past, but a big thing is also that this was a lot of speculation early on, is the idea of, they use the word savior here, which I think is just meant to be viewed as being Avatar, and the wording of like, I'm the more powerful savior, as in we're both avatars, but I'm the more powerful one, which is kind of interesting. Then there's also a comedy scene where Pavi basically talks to rocks, and Nikki's kind of questioning about that. And they're in the Black Rose secret compound, the White Lotus compound, and I guess they start messing about with the guards, including one of the characters who I'm guessing is actually our Captain Karthik, who they give us a different name to. So there's a few things. Yeah, Karun is what he's listed as in the audition side thing. So you get a glimpse into maybe the characterization they're going for, that like when they reunite, there's incidents from the past that are going to be emotional for both characters, because one was sort of picked and chosen and the other one was kind of forgotten. And then how does the incident where she lost her leg kind of play into that at all? So you can sort of picture kind of how things are going here. But what are your thoughts on this? Like, they're going for, okay, twins as the avatar. We've seen that recently with Roku. But in this case, the information seems to be pointing towards that in some way, somehow, both have the powers of the avatar, and something crazy has happened in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely makes for some sort of potentially cool sort of conflicts and sort of, story beats that they can sort of play on in the future. I mean, even just this, which, is sort of a rough idea. We have no idea if this is actually going to be the thing, but, even if they were just sort of, any sort of type of siblings would have some sort of issues with each other, right? And, this sort of, slice here is more so for just sort of, showing the actors or actresses sort of, having emotion with these characters and understanding the range that they have to perform. So, it's a good parameter for just the general idea of what would happen with these characters over the course of, the series and stuff like that. So I think, the idea that they're having sort of issues with each other, sort of standard sibling thing, and then they have the heightened issue of them being, saviors or avatars, just sort of adds to sort of the drama here. So, no, this definitely feels like it's something that sort of would be in place. Like we've seen, our other sort of set of twins have issues, and they both weren't the avatar. They were just both sort of benders, right? So, even in that sort of situations, there's issues that arise. And, considering that they're, we don't know their exact age when they're doing the slide, but we know, the general age of that they're sort of casting for, they're pretty young here and sort of immature. So there's a lot that they have to sort of figure out there, and sort of being this compound. I mean, we've seen, with Korra, how, it was for her sort of, becoming the avatar in sort of a compound, sort of secluded, isolated sort of environment here. So this is even more sort of heightened because the whole world has been sort of reshaped for this other sort of issue that sort of happened, right? So there's a lot that can go on here, that they're sort of playing off of that. Of course, we don't have the real understanding of and the whole concept, and this also is, I'm sure, a moving target as well, considering how long ago this actually was. So, but no, I think it's a cool sort of idea to get sort of the grasp behind sort of their sort of struggles with each other, especially at such a young age.
Yeah, because even from the stuff that we have, it already has evolved. If you look at the storyboard document that came out, the kind of 25 pages of storyboards, everything looks different. All the designs look very different from the more finalized stuff. Like Jay's outfit, the way Pavi specifically kind of looks, especially the animal companion, has greatly evolved from that stage to the more finalized kind of colored images that we have. So the same has probably happened to a certain degree with the story, but there's definitely ideas and themes that are going to be present as part of the story, kind of given that we do have stuff up to like a certain point in. I suppose we do need to talk about the whole idea of the twins both being avatars, which I think is the main thing that has caused problems. I've seen some people very angry about, like, oh, the Four Nations won't be around anymore or whatever. But it's mostly the twin avatar thing, just because, some people don't maybe in general understand the overall lore, but then people who do understand the lore might be some issues there as well. I think there's definitely openings to make this happen, just because we already have a dark avatar and the potential for that to be a thing. And then if there are new dynamics, especially with twins, I think there's even a way to do Rava's power split in some way where they both have it, and create the dynamic where they can only really develop as the avatar when they're around each other. But also the fact that it does seem to be this kind of mystery adventure journey where what happened to the world, but also why is the avatar like this? Why are the twins both like this? Is an interesting concept, and I like the mystery element if they really lean into that. So I'm very open to that. I hope whatever explanation they end up going with kind of works and makes sense if it is touching on stuff that we kind of know stuff about. But I'm pretty open to whatever way they kind of handle this. Once they haven't just kind of went with the idea of like, wouldn't it be cool to have like two like sisters with eyes lighting up, and they just kind of hand wave the explanation to get there, and they've gone for like the style over substance. But I don't think they will, because I think they did a lot of the mystery stuff in Korra, like in book 1 and the book 2 lore stuff really well. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I don't have too many problems, because I think there are ways around everything. Already, like the fact that Korra transitioning into our new avatars here is the first time we've had the avatar cycle move on, while Vatu is like part of the dynamic. That creates some like things that we don't know anything about. There's openings across the board, I think, to make it happen. But what are your thoughts on that, just as the concept, that the idea of them both potentially being the avatar, having the powers, and how does that work for you from like a lore perspective, that sort of thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I can understand sort of the hesitance to it. I mean, I think, the idea of there being two with the power definitely creates some sort of interesting sort of dynamics. And, if we're considering spirits and how they sort of work and stuff, like, how do we know, with any sort of certainty, sort of how they sort of work? I mean, we have, sort of what we've seen previously, but, is that sort of really sort of set in stone, or is it still sort of nebulous as sort of the spirit world seems in general, considering everything that sort of goes on there, and we still don't really sort of seem to fully understand it, or they haven't, taken the time to explain it in any sort of, high level detail, which, I kind of hope they don't really ever do that, leave some things a mystery and all that. But yeah, I mean, with Korra sort of, essentially resetting the sort of avatar cycle, who knows how things would really go going forward, right? So, I mean, I know, many people are still upset over that whole issue, as, we'll talk about in the episode later on today. But, that does give you the sort of avenue of making things go in a sort of a different direction. And considering there seems to be some sort of event that Korra was involved with, who knows how that could have, reflected on sort of the Avatar and Rava and everything going sort of forward here. And, Batu is out in the world. How does that sort of play into things, even if, the other twin isn't sort of the evil doppelganger, which, I think that might be maybe a bit too cliche, but, who knows? Maybe they could make that sort of work out really well. And granted, the characters are really young, so they have like a whole, lifetime to sort of develop and go in different sort of ways and stuff like that. So, just because they're having sort of conflicts now doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go sort of the evil twin sort of route here. But yeah. I think, it definitely has, some potential to be cool with just two characters having these powers and developing them over time, and sort of how that plays into the grander scheme of things, and how, eventually, for some reason or way, they're not going to always be in this sort of compound here. So they're going to have to go explore in some form or fashion, or at least one of them. And, we'll have to see how that sort of plays out. So, I don't know. I think from the beginning, it definitely can feel like a knee-jerk thing to consider that there's two of them. But, we do have twins that we've seen in the past. We've seen twins that are benders. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they don't survive. So, no, it's definitely something. And, I think if they take the time to do it well, it can work out, pretty cool, I think.
Yeah. Like even maybe the concept of something new that, like, hey, these are not just twins. There's like, they're like spirits are like intertwined in some way. That way, it opens the door to Rava being in both of them in some sort of a way, because it's the spirit, it's the same spirit that is the avatar, but it's kind of in both of them. How does that work? Because spirits can separate their life forces, as we know from the whole Yue and the moon spirit situation. So across the board, there's openings, even from like super early Avatar and lore and stuff like that. So very interested to see how that all works out. But yeah, like you said there, the other big mystery thing that maybe has been a point of contention is sort of the, right now, ultimately vague information about what Korra did, had to do, what happened. And there's a lot of kind of worry that they're going to add another thing that might lean people in the direction of thinking that Korra is a bad avatar, just from a reputational point of view, that if she is deemed as being responsible for this, that will make more people hate her. I think it's jumping to a conclusion when we just don't know what happened, because my assumption is that, okay, something crazy happens in the world just because it's the way things were going in the era. You know, Korra can't control every single part of the entire world, that she acts in some sort of heroic way and has to make some giant kind of move to give people a chance for the future. That I'm guessing there might be some sense of people view it as Korra did something, the Avatar has a bad reputation maybe in this era, but that the truth of it, potentially from the first maybe past life scene with Korra, might actually be that no, it was this really heroic act that prevented the planet from being destroyed in some way. It leaves it in this weird state, but people have hope again in some sort of a way, that it will be more of a heroic thing overall. But without a lot of the details about what exactly has gone wrong, it's hard to necessarily speculate about, because the main kind of consistent thing seems to be that there are storms. This is referenced in sort of some of the narrative stuff on the script, as well as the general description for the series. That, and I think some of the concept art shows it as well, that yeah, there's a lot of like northern lights type stuff going on in the sky, lightning, sand, energy storms. That immediately makes me think of, referencing Korra Book 2, the Everstorm, which was caused by basically like spiritual imbalance. That has that happened on a grand scale? That's one way to do it. That would suggest that something's gone very wrong with the human spirit dynamic, which I'm wondering, is that what they're going to do, given that it's kind of one of Korra's big legacy things, that she's reintroduced the spirits, and I've always wanted them to go in the direction of peace between humans and spirits. So I'm hoping they maybe don't take too many steps backwards on that. But again, this is the most vague part of these leaks, is something happened, Korra did something, wasteland type situation. And any speculation on your part for kind of Korra's legacy, I suppose, in all of this?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, there's something that, each avatar does that we don't necessarily seem to sort of like agree with in the future going forward, until we sort of figure out sort of the larger scheme of things. Like Karuk was the worst avatar sort of ever until, recently, where we figured out, oh no, he was working behind the scenes to do things. So, I wouldn't be surprised if this, doesn't go along that sort of route. Sort of the whole sort of thing is that next avatar sort of has to fix sort of the issues of the previous one, which is sort of just how sort of life goes, and you develop and evolve from there, and hopefully it gets a little bit better, on the next time around, but not always. So I don't know. I think there's a lot there that we don't know about, and I think regardless of what sort of the issue or event or whatever happened, it's going to be viewed in sort of a skewed light, sort of regardless. So I don't know, regardless of what happens, if it's going to make, the people who already sort of don't like Korra, like her better or worse or whatever like that. So I don't know if there's, your energy should be sort of focused in that. I am just sort of curious of what it is that she had to do, and sort of, how she was sort of able to do it, and sort of what's the result of it. Because it definitely feels like it was pretty sort of world adjusting. Again, considering, what she did before, keeping the portals open was a pretty sort of big thing to actually do, considering, that was thought not the right thing to do before. But yeah, I do hope it isn't too much of a back tread or anything like that, or if they at least they do a little bit of tread, it's a little bit of a skewed sort of angle, to sort of figure things out in the future. But that's definitely something we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, like this is probably where it comes down to the whole spirit dynamic, where I hope we get spirit characters that are able to just kind of like interact with people and they're just like around the place, rather than being kind of kept in the background. Because I've never agreed with some of the kind of backlash to book two of like all spirits should remain mysterious, when it's always been part of the Avatar to be like the bridge or to help humans and spirits kind of come together in balance, because they're the two life forms basically in the universe for Avatar. It's like humans and spirits. So keeping one of them just inherently mysterious has always felt like a weird take to me. So I hope there's some stuff going on there in that, like I would like us to have a spirit main character at some point, but who knows if that's the direction we're going in. Making the spirits maybe the overall enemies is a bit of a weird one, but again, we just don't know what happened overall. But it's interesting for sure. I think that's most everything. Like, there's the character Jay, who we don't know a ton about. He's an airbender. Some of the earlier stuff seems to show he has some sort of a airbending kind of powered kind of hoverboard style thing. So it's not like super advanced tech in that it still is powered by bending, but just an interesting one overall. So he looks like he's going to be sort of like Pavi's kind of like protector, and I think he's meant to be Order of the White Lotus. And then Captain Karthik, I think, is meant to be sort of the equivalent for Nisha, but he also might be maybe higher up in the White Lotus as well, which I think just by itself is an interesting one, that the White Lotus seems like they're going to be heavily involved. I'm intrigued to see what take on them we'll have. Are they just inherently good, or is it going to be more like the Shades of Grey White Lotus from the Yang Chen novels, where, okay, they've done some questionable things, and especially because there seems to be an issue of like they chose one of the twins in the past. How did that mistake come about, or whatever? But I suppose that might be our final kind of point here, is just what are your thoughts on White Lotus involvement from the beginning here in this series potentially?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that has a lot of potential to be pretty cool and interesting. I mean, I think it was cool to see how they sort of were involved in Korra's sort of time in that sort of era. And her whole story doesn't sort of revolve around sort of the White Lotus. But we get to see them in sort of initial parts and stuff like that, and later on as well. So I think it definitely has the potential to be sort of intriguing, because they there's sort of the de facto self-appointed sort of people who sort of help to protect the world, right? But they're not necessarily sort of always in it for like the best sort of outcome possible. They have this sort of long range view of things that don't necessarily seem to be good at any point in time, depending on sort of how you're looking at it. So there's definitely, some, intrigue that can go with their sort of organization as a whole. And the whole sort of incident that sort of split up the twins, there's a lot that can go about that. And, it could easily just been a choice that one of the order members or, someone high up in the order sort of made to have, that sort of caused this whole situation between the two twins in the first place. And maybe they're sort of backtracking on trying to sort of fix that issue with them or something like that. So there's a lot you can do with the White Lotus, and I don't know, maybe we'll actually have them more sort of regularly sort of involved in this show, in the series with the characters, if they really are sort of like the full-time sort of guards for these, younger sort of characters here. So that might be cool to sort of see them more involved in sort of how those characters sort of progress over time, if they sort of are part of the order, and how that sort of even works in this world. Because I mean, it seems like they survived this long, right? So I'm sure they had some play in the way of how things are set up in some form or fashion.
Yeah, like the Haven cities in terms of like who were they set up by it definitely seems to be a bit of a kind of mystery thing. Again, there might be some vague information about this, about like one of the kind of test screener person like said like there might be a war going on, and if you're a bender you have to participate in it. But that kind of seems weird if like the outside world is a wasteland. But we don't really know what the full situation is. I do wonder kind of what the mechanism of like the Haven cities actually being havens is, in that like that would suggest that like there's like an energy based protection around them, where like a storm kind of can't form overhead. The concept art kind of stuff maybe highlights something or other. I'm not really sure. Some of the storyboard stuff, you're in Alora, I guess, but you can't really tell what's super special about it, other than it seems like it's mostly kind of raised off the ground to a certain degree, but I don't really know what to kind of make of that. But that is most of the information we have here. Obviously, again, like, none of it's like super official. Like, there's the Facebook post with some of the casting information. Like, it's real, but like, it's not like official. Like, this series has still not been officially announced yet, like in any way, by Avatar Studios, Nickelodeon, Paramount. We know they're doing series, but they've never said any details about any of them. So this is one of those ones, like a lot of the other projects, where they still have to do base level early announcements on it. I'm guessing this is the second project, just because we have heard stuff about it, and the only other one we have heard about is the Aang movie, which actually has a date. But it's weird that we now know more about this, though I guess it highlights they're being more protective about their movie stuff, which I guess makes sense. But the expectation would be that this is, at some point in the months following the release of the Aang movie, this show will come out, because we're not expecting giant gaps between projects if they want Avatar Studios to really, really take off. And if a lot of this work has been done back from like middle of 2023, they've been working on this for quite a while now. And more recent information suggesting that like they have full episodes, at least in animatics format, and who knows, like, if they immediately acted upon finishing that to do the test screenings, we don't know. We still don't have much of a sense of anything, but I probably would expect this series to be announced at some point next year. But any guesses from you on when we're actually going to hear something official about this show?
That's a good one. Yeah, I don't know, maybe end of next year. I mean, considering when we, would potentially get the sort of movie and stuff like that, like, if it's after that, I wouldn't expect it, to have anything of it anytime soon. And if they're only sort of on sort of animatics and that sort of stuff now, then, there's a lot more work that they have to do, even if they do have sort of, the character sort of designs and stuff sort of locked down. So, no, that's a lot of work that they have to do for these sort of 26-1 episodes. So, I don't know. Maybe end of next year, early of the year following would be my maybe sort of guess. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, a lot depends on like what Avatar Studios do at the two big conventions, SDCC and NYCC. If they have panels at both, I'd expect this show to be mentioned at one or both of them in some sort of a early capacity. Maybe they might allude to it at SDCC, and then do some of the concept art reveals maybe that we maybe already have at New York Comic Con to more publicly announce it, because by New York Comic Con you're pretty close to the January release for the movie, and how much are you going to focus on it when the marketing is just going to be happening otherwise, and they have to do kind of franchise building stuff? I don't know, but yeah, they need to announce it sooner rather than later, especially now that kind of we know some stuff about it. Paramount have kind of reacted to the leaks in that they do take them down from like the main like Reddits and stuff like that when they get posted. The Avatarist put up a video that got taken down. Now, it was a kind of like bad use of the copyright system. He got the video back eventually, but it was down for a couple of weeks when he didn't show any of the images or anything like that. So they tried to do it. They kind of did, I'd say, the same amount that they did with when the image came out of CinemaCon, the kind of official leak that happened there, where they started taking stuff down, but then realized, oh god, it's out there, isn't it? We can't actually stop this because people have it. So, if you want another confirmation that it's real, why would they have done that if it wasn't? That's the other point. But yeah, we'll move from there, from the news, into our review for this episode, and that is going to be finishing off Korra Book 2 Spirits with K214 Light in the Dark. So the fourth of our 4-part finale here for Book 2, and a very relevant episode, I think, to kind of some of the stuff we were talking about just there with the Earth Avatar series and in terms of lore and mechanics. So yeah, we'll start with general thoughts and we'll kind of go through it kind of mostly scene by scene. I love this episode. I've always been a huge fan of this episode. This is a top 5 Korra episode for me, absolutely. I love all the main character arcs, the lore in book 2, and so this episode just kind of has everything I want from Avatar. But I also do just think, apart from it being like personally for me everything I want, I do just think for Korra, this has some of her strongest character moments in the entire series overall. And it's weird that a lot of the fandom maybe doesn't acknowledge that this is a big Korra growth book, because some of these moments, the Korra Tenzin scenes we get here, the accomplishment of what she does in this episode is huge. And I think as a finale, a big action-centric episode, it does a lot. Like, pretty much all the characters from the book are involved here in some sort of an interesting way. And we do some nice epilogue stuff to set up the second half of the series, to set up kind of Korra's era as well, because of how big her decision at the end is. So I basically love everything about this episode. A little bit maybe to say about the Mako Korra stuff, but that's mostly just like, I can accept them resolving the romance stuff here because it helps the rest of the series to be less drama focused. But otherwise, this is, I just think, a really good episode. But what are your overall thoughts on Light in the Dark?
No, I agree that this is a good one. I think it definitely shows really the sort of strength of Korra's sort of character. I mean, there are a couple ones, Korra alone and some other ones that sort of do similar sort of things. But I think in terms of her character developing, at the end of this whole season, and other than the first, and along with the first season as well, this is definitely sort of pushing her sort of forward in her character, because she has to do this, essentially on her own sort of power here. This is her, sort of without Raba, at least for a little bit. So she really has to sort of figure out how to do things and has to figure out how to get, sort of her confidence back with, with Tenzin's help and the rest of the crew and everything like that. So, it's another part of showing her sort of at a low moment and how she can sort of overcome the odds. And, what she does at the end of the episode, it affects the world going forward here. So, we just talked about, something else that she does in the future is going to affect, sort of things going forward. This is her already affecting the world, and, this is her sort of still developing and coming into her avatarhood, right? So this is, her at the sort of beginning part of this here. So no, I think this is a good one. I think, it's too bad that, the overall this sort of season gets sort of, ignored, because there's definitely parts of this season that definitely sort of stand out for her character and help her sort of develop.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll kind of go through this one scene by scene, just because it's action across the board. So our opening sequence is Unavatu basically wrecking the place. He arrives in UA Bay. He's ready to take back the physical world. He's met, of course, by the United Forces, who open fire. They do absolutely nothing to him, and he counters with water bending, easily moving the ships out of his way. And then we see the big moment of him ripping down the Aang statue. So, second book in a row where the villain group has targeted the statue here. They don't like this being here. This time it gets full on ripped down into the water, and we get a very nice transition from Aang's statue face into Korra as she wakes up. So, pretty good opening attack scene, just highlighting that here is the villain of this book arriving at the brand new Korra, Republic City, the whole gimmick of Korra, and he can just walk into the city, no problem, no one can oppose him, highlighting what will oppose him, and you need to go big. We're going to need to go big here to deal with him. So, very good job at getting across the threat here of this is an avatar being going like full monster power, basically, and I think that's cool to see that a whole army doesn't stand up to him. But your thoughts on this opening Unavatu?
Yeah, no, that is cool to see sort of this huge sort of spirit being. I mean, we've seen sort of Koizilla, so this is sort of like, another sort of equivalent of that, but this is, more modern. It's a character that can sort of really move and evolved and sort of push things out of the way. And, just, Korra's era is obviously more developed, but just because it's more developed doesn't mean it can necessarily, take on what was sort of natural of the world and in the past here, right? So it definitely shows, like you're saying, sort of the overwhelming power that he has, and that, we're going to need something just as big in order to sort of confront this issue. And, the current forces aren't really sort of equipped to sort of take on this sort of issue, as becomes pretty apparent.
Hmm. As we cut to Korra, we see Korra, Mako, and Bolin, who've been taken out from the previous episode, are found by the returning Tenzin and Co., that group. Kaya heals them all in spirit water, and then this is where Korra has to reveal that she failed, she was not able to win, Rava is gone, she's not the Avatar anymore, and there's just this real sense that she feels like she has failed, and not just failed, but failed in the worst and biggest way possible here, and she kind of is losing hope. And I really like that we immediately cut to Tenzin, and there's just a sense for the entire build up across this whole season has been, can he finally be the effective mentor figure that she needs? And he is actually going to do it, as we'll get to in a scene or two's time here. But I love the setup here, because this is what we did in like the first and second episode of the book. It was, we broke apart this important kind of student mentor relationship, and here's the recovery of that in a massive way overall. But I think good job at getting across just Korra's feelings of like, big moment for her as the Avatar, and just she absolutely feels terrible that she's failed. But what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, I agree. The emotions do come across pretty clear here because, this has been Korra's whole thing, is what she can do and her strength and her power to affect things. And, she tried her hardest here. She had her sort of crew here to sort of help her. But it still didn't seem like it was quite enough here. So it definitely feels like it's sort of like, worst case scenario, like she doesn't have, the support that she had before with Rava, and she doesn't know, she hasn't, a full grasp of what she can do in order to help the world going forward. And that's been her whole thing, her whole life.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we also bring up, I think it roughly is mentioned this scene, the idea that like the past lives aren't there anymore, which is why Tenzin is required to be the advice. But there's also a sense for like, what would the past lives have said in this situation? Like, this is a once in a 10,000 year thing. Like, Juan would be the only one who would maybe have any real context to say anything of particular note to her. But even then, she's already seen that backstory. She knows what she was meant to do, and that didn't happen. So, I think it's the usual kind of past life thing of like, this maybe wasn't the moment for them, this is where we needed the more personal touch from Tenzin, which we'll get to. Next scene, though, is we continue Unalaq's kind of rampage. This time he targets Raiko and Lin in the kind of police airship. He hits it with the spirit beam. Lin has to kind of save Raiko here, so she saves the president as the ship crashes into the city. Then we get sort of the execution of this, him trying to reclaim the physical world for the spirits. He engulfs huge parts of the city in spirit vines, which he has come out of the bay. And this also results in Varric and Zhu Li being freed, and we get the incredible do the thing glider moment as Varric makes his big escape, and we will see him like next season basically. So big thing here, again, the spirit vines do become a kind of part of Republic City, so this is another kind of permanent thing that basically ends up happening here, that we don't just defeat Unavatu and everything he did is gone. No, he has kind of made part of the physical world kind of a spirit location once again, that this is basically what he wants to do to the entire world. And maybe this might give us a glimpse into going into the future for Korra. How much of the world do you let become spirit wilds to be fair to the spirits? And that's an interesting talking point. But what are your thoughts on that more Unavatu action?
Yeah, no, definitely. His influence is going to be seen on the world. And it makes me wonder, in the future stuff, how much of that we'll still sort of see or how that has affected things. But yeah, his whole idea of sort of bringing the wild sort of back to sort of the current world and the spirits and their sort of involvement is his whole sort of thing here. So it's interesting to see how that sort of, was reflected in sort of what he was doing here and how it progresses going forward.
Hmm. We cut back to Tenzin. So here's how he approaches getting Korra kind of going again. He says that he knows he hasn't been the best mentor to her, but the reason for that is because he also had to grow himself. And so what he does is he tells her to let go of her attachment to who she thinks she is and to connect to her own inner spirit. Not Rava, but Korra's own spirit as a person, as an individual, of course. This continues on. It's quite a long sequence here, but this is the kind of opening kind of section of it here. And I like this because, again, it relates back to the early part of the season and the part that gets kind of a lot of hate. But this doesn't work unless you have that kind of dramatic kind of breakup, effectively, of this relationship to get the reunion here. That, yeah, there's an acknowledgement here that, hey, you were right to kind of, look to someone else to be a mentor to you because I wasn't what you needed. I needed to grow to be the mentor that you needed, which we saw in his arc with his siblings, of course, and then more recently in the last episode. And it's kind of interesting, like, so many fans who kind of criticize it kind of don't see some of that like this is a clear cut, like, they're book ending the season with this arc between Korra and Tenzin. So I've always felt that this works like really well, what he does here, and that he's immediately trying to use the advice he got from kind of Aang in the fog of don't think of yourself as someone else, as like a kind of construct, like you are more than that. He's using the same advice, but changing it for Korra and her situation. So I think this is a really good start to this. But what are your thoughts on Tenzin trying to get Korra going?
Yeah, no, they have to sort of, he has to come sort of full circle and sort of his understanding of himself and how he can sort of translate that to his mentoree here in this instance here, because he definitely, he knew, or, he learned that he had, these issues that he had to sort of overcome and sort of, become a better sort of person in general. And he's able to sort of pass on these sort of lessons, which you think is, sort of the whole point of things, right? Is sort of to pass it on to the next generation and progress sort of forward here. So no, I like that they're able to sort of have this sort of moment where he's actually sort of understanding everything that, he might not have done particularly well and able to sort of help someone else who's having sort of similar issues or just different issues. So no, I think it's good. We're getting to see him become sort of the mentor that we, always hoped that he would be, right?
Mm-hmm. He then shows her the Tree of Time, which I like the difference here of, like, he knows the history of this, that it's the Tree of Time, but Korra is just like, oh, it's Vatu's spirit prison, rather than, the tree was there before he was imprisoned in it, which is a fun detail. But yeah, we get the explanation here. The Tree of Time, its roots apparently in legend, bind the two worlds together, the physical and the spirit world. And long ago, the ancients meditated beneath the tree and connected to the cosmic energy of the universe. So a lot of information here about the Tree of Time and why it's so significant and important. And it's, I suppose, effectively the most the most powerful, ancient, notable kind of thing, in a way, in the Avatar world, kind of. The Tree of Time remembers all, and so Korra, when she goes in, sees all of her memories. Everything that she's seen is kind of recapped to her. She does get her memories back that she lost as well. And the point that he makes in all of this is that the most powerful thing about Korra is not like Rava being the Avatar, it's her own spirit. And he highlights that you as a person are strong because you are physically strong, but also you're unyielding, fearless, you're impressive on your own outside of the Avatar aspect of. She then sees Wan, and Tenzin points out, using Wan as an example, that Wan was notable before he fused with Rava. He was a regular person, but he was impressive. And Korra notes that he was brave, smart, he would defend the helpless. And the big point in all of this is he became a legend because of who he was, not what he was. And basically you have to treat yourself as being in the same discussion there. You shouldn't define yourself by what you are. Either you're more than just being the Avatar is the overall point. And this is a very fitting point for both book 1 and book 2, which has been sort of about Korra maybe overly defining herself by her powers, both her bending in book 1 and then specifically by being the Avatar in this book. So I think this is a really strong kind of like first half of Korra arc of like her gaining this kind of self-reflection of herself, and she comes out of this much stronger in the end. So this whole Tenzin speech here I just think it's fantastic. It's got lore, but it's also like really strong character stuff that links into Beginnings. So like anyone who says that Beginnings is just like a random lore drop in the middle of the season, it's like interconnected into the whole thing in my mind. But yeah, I love this. What are your thoughts on this big kind of lore drop here from Tenzin?
Yeah, no, I mean, Tenzin, sort of the scholar, the air nomad who knows things, and for a while was the only one really. It makes sense that he would sort of know these things, and he can sort of impart sort of the lore of this tree of time to Korra, who, of course, wouldn't necessarily notice, right? So, it's understandable that if there was anything that he could sort of teach her that would actually be sort of like on the nose, that he actually knows with, some sort of certainty, even if it is just sort of legends, this would be it. And, the fact that he's able to sort of weave the story into sort of helping Korra sort of understand herself and sort of her sort of core sort of character traits that, seemingly all sort of avatars sort of have, this sort of probably the thing that Rava looks for, or however the sort of reincarnation sort of cycle sort of works, is clearly sort of displayed here. And it's, something that can give, Korra back the confidence in herself, despite, her, seemingly failing at this point in time, right? So this is, a good moment for her to sort of really sort of grasp sort of herself as a person, as a young sort of character, and what she really sort of brings to the world, and sort of how she can sort of help things going forward. So no, I think this is it's a really good way for Korra to sort of figure out things and sort of progress forward. So no, I thought this was good for her character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just that sort of idea of like you kind of represent the traits that make a good avatar, even outside of the fact that you also happen to be the avatar. And that's the point. That was the whole idea of the origin story as well, is that like Rava was okay with this fusing, being with him for all of his lifetimes, because she saw something in him that represented something in humanity, and she was okay with this connection forever. But yeah, this little sequence here ends with, he urges her to connect to the cosmic energy and bend the energy within. She thanks him as she begins to do this. And as we go in here, we get some really cool kind of like recap stuff, which actually makes sense here because of the way the tree works. So we're hearing stuff that was told to us during Beginnings, that Rava and Vatu can never be fully destroyed. You have to find the light in the dark, which is an Unalaq line from like episode 2. Basically, find Rava within Vatu, because that's how it works. That's what we were told in Beginnings. So we cut to a very similar kind of visual kind of scene here, which is Korra kind of in the cosmos, above the world, walking along this path of light to connect with her sort of cosmic self, to connect with the cosmic energy. She does this, and what she immediately then does is she projects a giant blue spirit version of herself out of, herself and the tree. And this is how she will face Unavatu. She's also a giant in this format, being empowered by cosmic energy. That's the way to combat basically the dark avatar state, is by using the power source of the avatar state, which, as we know, is cosmic energy. So it all links together kind of nicely. Obviously, cosmic energy is a very kind of soft magic system. It can do anything pretty much as far as we're aware. It's not well defined, so it makes sense here that because Korra is the avatar, she can contain all this energy. Of course, she, of anyone, can do something crazy with the cosmic energy of the world. So this is very cool. So this is where we get introduced to kind of cosmic Korra, as I call her. Um, what are your thoughts on this sequence? So Korra gets her kind of book two Aang walk along the line in space moment.
Yeah, it's cool how that sort of, they work along the lines of the same sort of thing. But, here, as opposed to Aang's sort of first time doing it where he didn't really want to accept it, Korra is sort of, at this moment where she pretty much has to accept it and wants to accept it in order to sort of, right the wrongs and to sort of fight, Unavato in this moment here. So no, I thought this was a good way of her sort of, being able to connect with her inner sort of strength and her inner sort of, spirituality without the aid of Rava at this point in time, because Rava is what she's trying to go find and, sort of figure out how to get her connection back with her. So no, I thought this was a good way for her to show, just another way of showing her own sort of strength of character. And yeah, the whole sort of idea of the cosmic power is sort of very sort of like nebulous and how it sort of works and stuff like that. But like you said, the Avatar sort of already had this sort of pseudo connection with it because that's sort of how they control the Avatar state and everything like that. So it makes sense that at least even with the sort of broken we'll say connection with Rava, she's still able to sort of tap into it to some regard. It's not sort of a perfect thing, and we see that later on she does need a little bit of a help with it. But she's able to sort of at least get the initial boost to sort of start things off.
Mm-hmm. So yes, very cool sequence here. So she uses the portals to kind of project herself into the physical world, Yue Bei, and she just hits him immediately. She arrives on the battlefield like a rocket, just like straight into him, and kind of reveals herself to everyone there. We get some cool stuff here. They fire spirit beams at each other with Korra winning the kind of beam clash. She then kind of rushes him. It's actually quite a physical fight here, more so than energy, even though there's little bits of that. He tries to use his kind of tendril things that he has, but she just catches them and kind of like ties them up and kind of drags him into this really cool flying knee. And then she basically does the kind of John Cena attitude adjustment kind of with him through a mountain, and she has him kind of like stunned a little bit, and she does the kind of like punch on his chest to sort of like check for Rava, which is what she's looking for here. She's trying to find the light in the dark, but nothing seems to come up here. Now Vaatu of course says, that like you won't find that, there's nothing there. So Korra loses hope a little bit because this is what she was counting on, was to get Rava back. And this is where the kind of tables turn in the fight, because Korra's distracted by this. She gets spirit beamed, and it's not looking good at this point. So yeah, the initial stage of this fight is, I just think, super cool. I like the choice for Korra, for this to represent sort of Korra on her own, for it to be quite physical like this, and just like she beats him up rather than just overpowers him with bending, is very Korra in my mind. So I definitely like that. But what are your thoughts on the start of this giant fight?
Yeah, no, Korra is a very sort of physical character, physical sort of avatar. So yeah, her sort of, doing all these sort of, MMA type moves and stuff like that, it does feel sort of in motion. And, we've seen her do that, or we will see her do that sort of, just as a normal sort of person, regardless of her sort of bending here. So yeah, I mean, I think it works rather than her just doing sort of the energy beam clash, which we do get to see, and that is also cool. We get to hear the sounds and everything like that. So it's definitely very impactful when we do see the energy beams, and that definitely, adds to the whole sort of, issue of these two huge beings sort of fighting with each other, right? Because this is a huge clash, of two huge sort of spiritually empowered sort of beings that are like the size of mountains, right? So that's definitely sort of on brand of what's sort of happening here. So no, I think it's a cool way of sort of depicting this sort of thing, because there's plenty of ways they could have shown sort of like a spiritual battle, but they chose to go with this sort of route.
Mm-hmm. So we get a quick cutaway to everyone rushing to defend Korra's body from the dark spirits incoming, which is kind of cool. You see them all kind of line up, and like Mako shoots lightning, Tenzin has his airbending, that sort of thing. It's cool to just see them form a line defending the tree as the spirits come in. But then we cut back to Unavatu, and he basically has Korra beat at this point, and he attempts to use dark spirit bending on Korra. So we see this time it's a purple corruption here rather than the kind of yellow light, and it's nearly complete. So it looks like Korra is about to lose here. Again, we don't actually know the official result of killing someone with dark spirit bending. Based on what Unalaq said episodes ago, it apparently destroys souls. Now, if that just means the same as killing them, but it's in a bad way, or that's actually no, it kind of removes a soul from the kind of reincarnation cycle, is sort of unclear. But it's implied to be this very more than just typical defeating someone style ability. We also cut back and we see Eska and Desna join the defense as well. They're on the right side kind of at last. And there's a little bit of the Eska and Bolin relationship kind of that goes in here, where we'll later find out they're both just kind of going along in the kind of heat of the moment, and their relationship is at its maximum. But it is fun overall as everything is going on. But what are your thoughts on these kind of action sequences?
Yeah, no, I think this is, it's cool having this sort of back and forth here of what the crew is doing to sort of protect Korra while she's sort of fighting or attempting to fight Unavatu, and she's a little bit sort of struggling here and there. So I think it's a good interplay to show, sort of there's a lot sort of going on throughout this whole sort of incident, which makes sense. I mean, this is like, a battle for, how the world will be going forward for the next, thousands of years, right? So I think this, is a pretty sort of epic sort of conclusion of things, of trying to get everyone sort of involved. Tensions are high, maybe there's some romance, maybe there's not some romance. So no, I think it's cool. It definitely shows a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. And then we get the big moment here. Jinora arrives on the battlefield with Unavatu and Korra. She's glowing in light as she kind of comes out of the portal. And she basically stands in front of Korra, kind of facing Unavatu, and just kind of... the idea seems to be that she has like the light spirits in this kind of like ball in front of her, and she engulfs Unavatu in light. And then all of a sudden, within Vatu, Rava is now minorly visible, and so you can see the idea of like Korra has hope again, and she immediately just charges straight up to him and just quickly kind of stuns him, and then rips Rava out really quickly, because harmonic convergence is nearly over at this point. It should be noted as well at this point in time. And she ends the conflict by light spirit bending Unavatu. In the process of this, defeating her uncle Unalaq and Vatu at the same time. So this is the defeat of the Dark Avatar here, with our assumption or sort of running theory being that Unavatu, I think very clearly, is Avatar state, like permanent Avatar state on. So because both were killed at basically the same time, this should end the Dark Avatar cycle, because regardless, she defeated the spirit, which should break the cycle in the same way that Rava was defeated in the previous episode. That broke the cycle. It should be the same here as far as we're aware. So she says, go in peace, because as we see in the kind of upcoming scene, she has had to quote unquote like kill Unalaq in this moment here. There was no way to separate them because of how much Vatu was kind of taken over. But this is the victory in the conflict here. So cool moment. I know a lot of people question like, well, what does Jinora actually do? But I think they've done enough across the season to get across the idea that Jinora is notably spiritual. She's not just spiritual. She, coming out of this, is like probably the most spiritual kind of person, maybe outside of the Avatar, but even then she seems to have a particular kind of focus on it. She has had light spirits around her even after like darkness fell, and with how crazy everything is going on with harmonic convergence, I think it's perfectly fine, the idea that she basically brings the remaining light spirits sort of like to the battlefield and just slightly shifts the balance towards light, minimally, just so that Rava is visible again. And that's kind of what kind of solves the whole issue of like why Korra couldn't do it before but could do it now, was just a little bit more light being present because of how notable things are with regards to Janora's spirituality. That's been another kind of theme throughout the book, is just Janora being particularly special when it comes to spiritual matters. And, you know, you might add into that the fact that, you know, she's been in the spirit world separated from her body for a very, very long time. She might be, to a certain degree, on the verge of becoming a bit of a spirit by herself, which is why they kind of, I think Iki notes, like, she looks so beautiful because she's kind of looks a little bit different, which is interesting. But what are your thoughts on the kind of finish to this conflict here?
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. I think, you know, it feels like Janora has, like you're saying, this sort of extra connection. Like, I don't know, you know, how much of it is her sort of being connected with it or her actually having sort of the light spirit, but at the very least, she seems to be able to sort of like locate that sort of, you know, connection of spirituality. So her having the sort of ability to sort of, you know, flash it and just, you know, bring it to the surface feels like something that, you know, she would be able to do, or she would be able to sort of locate in this sort of moment. And yeah, who knows, you know, maybe she just was in there long enough that she just absorbed enough spiritual energy, and this is her just sort of pushing it outward before she's able to get back to her sort of original body here. But regardless, you know, it's enough of a boost just to get Korra up there and sort of to search again for Rava and sort of get her out of there, which, you know, she already knew Rava was in there, right? She just needed enough of, you know, whatever to sort of get her out of there fully. So, you know, I think that, you know, works in this sort of instance here, and her sort of, you know, using the Goem piece, you know, way of sort of dispelling spirit, you know, works in this sort of instance here. No, because that's sort of what she's been focusing on the whole sort of season here. So it makes sense to sort of end the sort of big spirit in this sort of way here, right before they're able to sort of get back in the spirit world and connect again.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that she peacefully defeats the spirit of chaos. She uses the light version of the technique to take him out. We don't really know necessarily if this has any like other special kind of impact on him, because I'm assuming you can't really, like, quote unquote, like, purify or switch Unalaq to the light because he is the spirit of darkness. But it's a pretty clear, you know, defeat here of like, yeah, okay, we're back in an era of light 100% after this. So just in terms of thinking about, I suppose, the Avatar going forward, you look at this in terms of, if it is maybe another dark Avatar, what do we know right now? Is that, well, the running kind of approach, I think, after this, and what they said in interviews, is that, yeah, Vaatu should be within Rava, within Korra, because of all the kind of connection stuff going on there. But that Vaatu won't be a threat until much, much, much closer to the next harmonic convergence. So basically 10,000 years from now. Now, they might have changed their approach to that if they wanted to do something, because there's obviously the idea of, if the world got like very heavily out of balance and darkness sort of started to happen, would Vaatu within Korra be affected by that and grow? That could be a way to do a threat. That might have been like a factor in it. But there shouldn't be a reincarnation cycle anymore. The cycle should be broken for the Dark Avatar because of what happened here. Is that the way she kind of kills her uncle is sort of like, it frees him from the cycle, that he's not just forever going to be the Dark Avatar. That's why there's also the Goen piece, I think, as well. That she has saved him from the kind of monster he kind of became. That's also a subtle, I think, theme as well that's present in all of this. But yes, pretty clear victory here. In the aftermath of this, what we get is Rava and Korra must fuse again. There's not much time. So she takes Rava and Janora back to the spirit world. This time, you know, we see her return. She again lands like a kind of like a missile here. All the dark spirits go light. She kind of resolves the issue. Jinora at last returns to her body, revealing that Korra has saved the world to everyone who's been keeping her body alive, which is a very powerful moment of just like Jinora comes back as this like wise like spirit sage and just like announces that the Avatar has like been victorious. It's a cool moment. And yes, we get the big moment here, another fusing of an Avatar, but this time in a more kind of peaceful way than the desperate way it was before. Korra kind of rides up to the arch of the two spirit portals on Rava. They fuse. They are back together, and the Avatar is back. But as we find out, the past lives are still gone. So there will be a cycle going forward, but it's effectively been reset. Korra is sort of the new first Avatar, though, you know, she's still a reincarnation of ultimately of Wan. It's just that the link back to them is kind of gone to a certain degree. So very, very cool moments here. I like this resolution that, oh, Rava's been destroyed, but she still remembers everything from before, and she's just straight away like, we've got to fuse again. Even though she potentially has this opportunity to be free again if she wanted to, she chooses to want to be the Avatar because I guess she views what the Avatar has done as being maybe more valuable than what she did just on her own, separately trying to counter Vaatu, which is a kind of interesting character point for Rava. But what are your thoughts here on the immediate kind of a resolution to the end of the fight here?
Yeah, no, I think this was a nice way to sort of capstone sort of what we've seen happening. We get to see sort of rejoining in the spirit world, seeing, you know, Jinora and her sort of, you know, spiritualness and how she's sort of announcing things. That was a really sort of nice scene where she's coming out of the water there. So that's definitely a cool way. And yeah, the whole sort of merge scene, you know, compared to before, like you're saying, how it was sort of desperate, this was a cool way to show her sort of riding up and sort of connecting them together. And I think that, you know, it just shows the strength of even just sort of Korra's character and sort of what she's doing. Because, you know, I guess, you know, like you're saying, she really didn't have to, Rava didn't really have to sort of merge back or anything like that, considering, you know, sort of the state of the world at this current time. But definitely feels like there's just, you know, a connection there that's lasted so long that it's like, why not sort of keep it going, even if this is essentially the start of a new cycle.
Mm-hmm. I suppose one more technical point that maybe is worth bringing up is just that, like, they maybe have a pathway to do something with the idea that, well, this time when she fuses with Rava, Vaatu is inside Rava, so has she somehow kind of fused with both of them? I don't really think that's the intent of what we're kind of trying to do here. I do, at least right now, kind of view it as just, Rava and Korra are bonded forever, but then you have separate to that is just the kind of light and dark bond that is there between Rava and Vaatu. And I don't think Korra is bonded forever with Vaatu as well. We'll see. That is a way they could maybe do things, but I don't think that is the intended takeaway from this scene overall. But we will move on. We get Korra going over to Eska and Desna to basically apologize for not being able to save their father. But they've had a complete turnaround at this point. They understand Korra's actions and they now see what he had become in the end. That what they were all trying to say to them beforehand is actually true. He cared more about his goals and his plans than his family. And that in the end he was quite deplorable is I think the wording that gets used here. So it ends on better terms here between the cousins here, and we get past this kind of issue here. We then also get Eska and Bolin deciding to go their separate ways because they kind of both realized they both let the moment kind of get to them and they thought they were going to die, so they had this big moment of connection. But, you know, they'll always be, a care for one another, but this is not the relationship that they were maybe destined to have. A nice way to end it. It's like a good final scene on what was a kind of very weirdly done ship, I think, over the course of the whole book. But what are your thoughts on these two scenes here? Korra with Eska and Desna, and then the Eska and Bolin.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, this, considering how these sort of relationships sort of started and how they were, also sort of like awkward, I think this is probably like the the best sort of ending way for them to sort of come to some sort of like, decent sort of resolution here with Cora and her cousins, and then, Bolin and, the cousins here as well. I think that, I don't know, that worked out well. I think it worked out better in the end than it sort of started. So I like that.
Hmm. Then we get Korra and Tenzin talking, and it's just some nice resolution here, some final words, and then it looks like we're about to kind of wrap things up. Tenzin's just kind of like, okay, I guess all you have to do is close the portals and we can go home. And then Korra reaches out to just do it sort of on autopilot because that's kind of what Wan did. That's what everyone thinks she should do. Then she takes her hand back and thinks maybe it's not the right thing to do. She even notes that maybe Unalaq had a point. I think he might have been right to a certain degree, that basically, should the Avatar always have to be the bridge between humans and spirits, that they're the only ones sort of trying to facilitate these two groups trying to be at balance with each other? Maybe we're meant to live together. Maybe that's what true balance is, not me trying to kind of, in specific instances, keep balance between them. But no, maybe something big like this is actually needed. And she kind of points out that, like, maybe Juan was not fully correct in what he did. Maybe this is the approach. But this time, instead of, like, I suppose, compared to maybe Korra's decisions maybe at the start of the book, where Tenzin would maybe counter them, he says he supports her decision, whatever decision she ends up making, which is that she actually does keep the portals open here, which is a huge decision here that you would maybe say the series hasn't overly focused on this. Like, spirits are present in book 3 and 4 and in the comics, but it's definitely something we want more core content to focus on. And who knows, maybe this is a key decision. Stuff here relates to what's going on with the next era, but this is a massive decision because it's huge for the world, but also in relation to Korra's overall arc, this is the first, I suppose, super clear sign that she's kind of listened to what one of her villains has had to say. It's sort of a prequel to her kind of book 4 arc when it comes to, like, her dealing with her villains and the impact on her. And we see that very clearly up here, that she can see that what Unalaq overall did was wrong, but that there was a core point underlying all of this, which was the sort of ideal of his point in a way. So I've always really liked this scene. I think I chose this as like one of my favorite scenes when there was this kind of video anniversary event for one of the previous Korra anniversaries. But what are your thoughts on this conversation and the Korra Spirit Portal decision?
Yeah, no, I think this definitely shows, just more growth on her character and her able to sort of to listen to different viewpoints and to sort of understand where they're coming from. Whereas before she would sort of, disregard any sort of opinion that she didn't deem as sort of like the right thing immediately. She's, taking time to consider it. She even sort of asks for advice in this moment as well to sort of, get another perspective at this moment in time. So no, I think this is definitely, it's cool to see her sort of, try to figure this out and, just to decide on her own that maybe, what was done in the past doesn't necessarily have to be sort of the future going forward here. And, then she definitely can see sort of the reason behind sort of Juan's decisions and sort of, past Avatar's sort of decision to sort of keep it closed. But, in this sort of current new era that she's in, there's a better way going forward, a new path that they can sort of take together with the spirits. And yeah, there's definitely, a lot that goes along with this sort of situation. And, we necessarily haven't seen sort of the full scope of this result. We've only seen a little bit of it in sort of Republic City here and a couple other places. But, it's definitely something that can have, big ramifications going forward. And yeah, like you're saying, maybe this does, overlap into other series and other eras and stuff like that. And maybe there's other reasons for different results later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they might also do a thing where, like, maybe in relation to, like, the overall run of Korra, maybe 2 spirit portals was fine, given where they're located. Maybe the 3rd portal is what maybe causes the problems, being right in the middle of the main city, the main landmass type thing. We'll just have to wait and see. Next scene is Korra and Mako talk. So this is the final Makora breakup here. So we address stuff like, she knows about the breakup that Mako hadn't wanted to kind of tell her about just because of everything that's been going on with the memory loss. But she remembers because of the Tree of Time. She apologizes for kind of like, how she handled things back during the initial breakup. He apologizes as well. And they both just effectively agree that like them as a romantic kind of relationship is probably not going to work. So they do break up with kind of a similar kind of idea to the Eska Desno one of like they'll always care about each other. But in this case, because they're also like super close friends, it's more that they will stay close. It's just that they're not a couple anymore. So this is the actual final Korra and Mako breakup here. I think it's kind of fine for what it is. It does feel like it maybe ignores some of the specifics of kind of what was going on, just because like a lot of this happened in the middle of a lot of drama happening, and now it's kind of we're past that, and they kind of treat it as like their actions during drama before they developed is representative of everything. But overall, for the sort of trajectory of the series, they obviously had, I think, mostly figured out at this point roughly what they wanted to do with the relationships. I'm fine with this as being the kind of way they went with it, because I do think the relationship stuff is better going forward after this and feels less drama focused than it had been for the first two books. And unfortunately, this relationship was kind of emblematic of a lot of that stuff, and so it probably had to you had to end it ultimately. So it's the one kind of thing that really references the kind of, for me, weaker part of book two, but the scene itself within this episode is perfectly fine in how it's done. But what are your thoughts on this breakup scene?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think this scene in itself is, is fine. It seems like they're coming to sort of a decent understanding. And yeah, I think, maybe it's just, sort of situational, which was the reason why they didn't do this sort of, better sort of resolution earlier, because there were, other factors and other things going on that sort of got in the way of things, which is unfortunate how that sort of played out. So, maybe there was a better way to do it in the grand scheme of things. But I think in terms of them sort of coming to an understanding of characters and how they'll, be involved with each other's futures going forward, I think this was a good resolution to that.
I'd say the only other maybe negative about this is just for the future trajectory of Mako's character. All the blame for the drama is mostly placed on him, I think, coming out of this, because for him, this is, I suppose, his second breakup here with one of the main characters. And so he's very much like, he has the arc where he has to sort of basically recover from this, whereas Korra and Asami both sort of just completely move on from this with no real issues. It's just, I do think they maybe overly focus Mako's arc on this for the next while, to the point where they did have to do a lot of work to help him kind of get past this, and it's maybe not the best arc as such for him overall, because they did sort of mostly go with the idea that, well, you have the two breakups, so it must have been you who was the problem, even though the actual breakup is them both kind of admitting that like they both don't work for each other overall, which is a little bit odd. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on the romance stuff overall. And then we get to the final scene of the episode and the season, and that is that Korra gives a big speech that starts with first announcing what's going on with the tribes, because of course Unalaq has died, so the leader of both tribes is dead, and given what he was trying to do, as part of his plan and the politics involved, she announces that the southern tribe is now going to be independent. They will still have a relationship with the north, and they'll still be kind of connected to a certain degree, but now it is properly independent. They elect Tonrock as the chief, the proper chief of the south here, in a very cool moment. And then Korra more specifically then talks about the results of what has just happened here, her approach as the Avatar going forward. She has decided to forge her own path and basically not just do what Avatars have done in the past. She will keep the spirit portals open, meaning humans can go into the spirit world physically, and spirits can come into the physical world. That humans and spirits are going to have to learn to live together. She commits to the idea that she will continue to use Rava's light spirit to guide the world toward peace and balance, but basically it's not solely on her to facilitate balance between humans and spirits. She will still help with that, but she's just putting it on everyone now that this is important for balance. Everyone has to try, and I will continue to do so. She also mentions at the end here, she can feel that harmonic convergence has shifted the planet's energy. They are entering a new age, as we cut up to the lights dancing in the sky, of course, the idea that we have southern, northern lights, that sort of thing, because spirits are back in the world in a bigger way than they have been in a very long time. And it's also, I suppose, a kind of subtle tease about other stuff that could have possibly happened, which is the return of the airbenders, as we'll kind of find out next season. So I love this chorus speech. This is a really cool kind of idea of, in a way, kind of marking the end of the first half of the series, where like we effectively started off with Korra in Republic City giving a speech where she said the basics, but she was so new, there wasn't that much to it. Whereas this is her properly, forging her own path after all of this development, talking about kind of political matters of her home tribe, with the southern tribe being independent, but also a slight shift in the way she views being the Avatar. So I think that's pretty good development overall. And I think it's a very good setup as well for book 2 going into 3, which I actually think is one of the kind of smoother transitions between books for Korra overall. So I'm a big fan of this speech as well, as just an example of Korra gets like 4 or 5 like amazing moments in this episode, and the speech is definitely one of them. But what are your thoughts on her speech to end the book?
Yeah, no, her speech is really good here. I think, like you're saying, like she, at this point in time, she has a better grasp of the world and sort of herself as a character and the Avatar, ness in general and what she's going to do going forward. So, I think the idea that she's able to say sort of concretely, what's going to go forward, how she's going to help, nothing, of course, will be perfect, and there's still a lot of issues that, we'll see coming up that have to be sort of revolved, and she has to be involved with different things and stuff like that. But, she has sort of at least a loose plan of how things are going to go going forward, and, she's just going to take it from there. So, no, I think this was a good way for her to sort of capstone everything that's sort of happened, and her to sort of, explain how, things are going to go forward in the future as her as the Avatar.
Mm-hmm. And we have finished the book, so we won't go crazy in depth, but we will have some reflection here on just overall having, over the last few months, gone through book 2 Spirits again. It's always been like my favorite book of Korra, and every time I rewatch it, it kind of cements that in my mind in terms of, yes, it does the things that I like in Avatar really well, but I do think just in general, there's just some really strong character stuff throughout this. Like, Korra, in my mind, has one of her best character arcs across a book, hugely important to her development, and her being so broadly liked by the fandom in book 3 is because of like the arc she has here, in my mind. Tenzin has a great arc. Jinora across this book jumps from being one of the kids to being a very notable character who you are super eager to follow anytime she is in the spotlight. Plus they did stuff with a lot of the other characters, like introducing Varric, Zhu Li, Tenzin's siblings are properly get a bit of characterization here. There's obviously, I think, the same thing with most books of Korra, which is that there is room for spots to do more with elements here and there. But I do think every book of Korra has that every book could use an extra episode here, 2 episodes there. But I do think comparatively, this is a relatively complete book overall, where I don't have that many complaints, and it's not the worst book, I think, for this is underdeveloped, where I would say Asami kind of fell out of the plot, I think, a little bit around the midway point. That's probably one of the main criticisms, but at least she had something at the start with the business arc with Varric. It's just that she didn't get to be used that much later on in the season. But otherwise, the spiritual arc, I've always liked Unalaq as a villain, finally addressing the spirits, and I like that Korra takes it to heart. and it doesn't just get dismissed at the end. I think that's really important to make it feel impactful. And Bolin has an arc. Mako maybe doesn't have the absolute strongest arc, but his sort of redemption moment that he was right about Varric is actually quite good across those episodes. So for me, I feel it's kind of the most complete book, that it benefits from having that like extra episode compared to any other season. Like 14 episodes worked versus 12, 13. And because I don't have issues with sort of lore, or I don't overly find like Korra annoying in early episodes because I think it's very understandable, a lot of the common criticisms for this book I just don't agree with. So that's why I have the kind of reverse opinion on it to a lot of people. I just really think this is a super solid book of Korra. But overall, Greg, now that we're done, what are your thoughts watching book 2 again for Korra?
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed rewatching this whole book. I think it's cool to get to see Korra in this sort of way of her sort of understanding more of the Avatar's sort of history and the spirits behind it, and sort of, how that sort of developed over time. I think it's cool when we get to sort of figure out sort of the backstories of different things and sort of how they're gonna, sort of adapt it going forward. And this really does feel like she's able to affect the world in some sort of meaningful way that, most of the world wasn't really sort of aware of at this time. Like, not everyone, especially with it being so sort of, postmodern or just modern in general, the whole idea of the spirits being involved is something, isn't something that you necessarily would see. So she really does something, new and different, that hasn't seen in a lot of years, introduction into the world that, has a lot of ramifications going forward. Like, I don't think, season 3 would be sort of quite as cool if we didn't have, sort of what she did with harmonic convergence and, getting the abilities to get sort of the new airbenders and stuff like that. So, she does a lot of change here that affects the world overall, rather than, a specific nation, sort of trying to take charge of things, which is cool and does make for a lot of cool action set pieces. So I definitely can see why, some people would rate some of the other seasons a bit sort of higher, because, there's clear cut things that's happening. This one, if you're not sort of into the spirits and stuff like that, it can definitely feel a bit sort of, just sort of all over there in terms of what they're sort of going for. But I think if you can get past some of sort of those things and, see, Korra's growth of character, then this, season can really sort of stand out there. And, with the sort of, 2 sort of, parter episodes in the middle there, that, sort of change up how things and gives you that sort of, dedicated lore dump. I think that's also pretty cool. I think that's something that I always share with people, just those 2 episodes. If there's nothing else, you share those 2, and people will tend to like that, out of everything, even if they don't like the whole book overall. So, no, I think for me, it definitely works. It's not one that I would necessarily skip if I'm rewatching the whole sort of show.
Yeah. That's the thing, like a Korra in general, is like the only quote unquote skippable episode is really like Remembrance from the final season. Otherwise, like you kind of miss an episode of Korra, you miss whole plot beats happening because it's so kind of packed with stuff. And it's absolutely the same for this season as well. I do think the reception has gotten better within the fandom for book 2. I definitely felt like a few years ago it was like people had their list, it's their top 3, and then a giant gulf, and then finally book 2. I think at the very least, even if people still think it's the weakest book, it's in range of the other ones now. That I think some of the really obvious stuff, like, people not really understanding the lore of Avatar, and because of that feeling that the lore in Korra is wrong, has kind of fallen away in the fandom, because people do kind of, I think, better understand things now, that this is what they have settled on as the kind of core basis of the lore in the franchise. Because, like, sure, you still see people be weird about, like, oh, the line turtles give bending, what about the animals? And it's like, it was never established that Appa could give people airbending, that sort of idea. That, like, they don't think about that. They just complain because the legend says this, but they don't actually think about the kind of ramifications and the fact that, like, did Toph say that Badgermole gave her bending? No, she was already a bender. That sort of idea. So the lore kind of stuff has been better, and I think there's been enough like Korra defense kind of out there that people realize that, yeah, just complaining that Korra is a brat at the start is maybe not a very nuanced point about kind of what's going on here. Especially because, like we pointed out, both Tenzin and her father kind of apologized to her for their behavior as well. So that there is that growth from all three of those characters involved in that early stuff. And yeah, I've always been a huge fan of this book. I love going back to see it here, and I think things have been getting better over time with it. I suppose, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think opinions have changed at all in the last basically 10 years on Korra Book 2, or is it still much the same, that it's still comfortably considered the weakest overall?
No, that's a good point. I think it's mellowed out a bit. I think people aren't sort of as vocal as they were before, as, in terms of like, hating on it just because. And, I can see, a lot of it is from just sort of the fact that, Korra did sort of lose her sort of connection. So I think, whenever that's sort of brought up, they always sort of mention this book in that sort of regard there. But I think in terms of the season overall, it definitely has, become sort of not as sort of, stand out as the worst one ever, in terms of, the Korra sort of reign overall. I think, people still have, some issues with Korra in general, but that's just, their preference and sort of when you sort of got into Avatar and sort of which season sort of holds more precedence in your sort of favor and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I think, it definitely seems like it's not sort of as out there as before, but, there's still, the first one there, and that's, for some people, that's all there will be.
Yeah, I think in general, yeah, that's a good point. Is that I think in general, overall, Korra hate has kind of calmed down a lot, just with stuff that's happened, like when it came back to Netflix and people reassessed it, and we got past some of those opinions that were in sort of some of those initial hate Korra video essays that had come out like immediately after the show ended, that had affected a lot of the discourse surrounding the show. I think people just appreciate it better. And especially in the context of like we're now beginning to get information on the next show, and definitely some of the earlier reaction was kind of leaning towards the idea of like, yeah, this is kind of how Korra was initially received, that, wait, what, the next series isn't that the ATLA follow-up? Who is this Korra? Why are we doing that? Hopefully we don't have too much of that, but I do think just in general, fandom tends to be like that change, for whatever reason, is a problem, even though most Korra fans' favorite book is the book called Change, which is an interesting one. But anyway, that is the end of our review for Light in the Dark and Book 2 Spirits. We will do the planned sort of Avatar episodes that were meant to come with this on the next podcast. So the next one will focus in on, I think it's Serpent's Pass and the Drill. And then we'll get back to our kind of usual format after that. But obviously that will be in 2025, when hopefully we'll finally begin to get some communication from Avatar Studios. I still feel we might be waiting a few months in the year before we get anything, but something is going to happen next year. It's just about how long are they going to keep us waiting? Are we going to have to wait all the way to San Diego Comic-Con? Not really sure. I think there'll be something sooner than we expect, but it's just an awkward situation. So I suppose just the final question is, for the last podcast for the year, when do you think they're finally going to officially communicate about some of this stuff next year?
Ooh, good question. I'm going to say maybe mid-year sometime we'll start getting some more information from official sort of sources, quote unquote, about what's going on in the future, especially if they're going to be putting stuff out the following year. So that'll be my guess, but who knows?
Yes, who knows? Avatar Studios, it's real, but they need to communicate. But yeah, that has been episode 283 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.